Grant Amato was in that house with the dead bodies of his mother, father, and brother for at least 2.5 hours.
Did you leave the house with your brother Cody looking like that? Or did you leave the house with your father looking like that? Or your mother? Is that how you left your family?
No.
This is Grant Amato. In 2019, he was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. He had killed his entire family. Detectives were at a loss. He was a 30-year-old man living with his parents. One day, he seemed to snap. It all looked very random, until they discovered Grant's nasty obsession with a cam girl from Bulgaria. Indeed, this case is as weird as they get. Grant Amato had a strange family life, and it all came to a breaking point when his addictions and obsessions clashed with his family's interests. First, he cost them $200,000. Then, he took their lives. Let's dive into this case and uncover Grant Amato's very twisted motive. Our case begins in Chulado, Florida. It's a tiny town of just under 2,000 people, a short drive away from Orlando. Chulado was the home of the Amato family, led by parents Margaret and Chad. Margaret had a son from a previous marriage, Jason. But Margaret and Chad got married when Jason was only 3, so in many ways, Jason felt like he was Chad's son too. The 3 of them were a tight-knit family. So soon enough, there were 2 more sons, Cody and his little brother Grant, who was born on May 20th, 1989. The 3 boys were of pretty similar ages, and they grew up as best buddies. They did everything together, went to the same school, watched the same movies, and played the same sports, particularly football. Cody and Grant even went on to pursue the same career. They became nurse anesthesiologists. The Amato family was pretty rich. They lived in this beautiful house and even had a horse stable where Margaret kept adopted racehorses. Both parents had high-paying jobs. Margaret worked as a client operations manager for a healthcare company, and Chad was a clinical pharmacist and a computer engineer. You might think, oh, this explains why the kids stayed with their parents until well into their 30s. They had everything, right? Sure, from a financial point of view, but the relationships in the family weren't perfect. According to Grant, his dad could be a very controlling figure. Sometimes he was even abusive toward Margaret.
In that time, my dad was a very, angry, violent type person.
Overbearing.
You know, he would push my mom, and one instance, you know, it was getting to that age where me and Cody were kind of getting old enough to maybe be able to do something if she needed our help.
Jason, the eldest son, moved out of the family home when he was 19, but he remained very close to the family, and he would visit regularly. However, as he had started a family of his own, the visits grew less and less frequent. That left Cody and Grant to continue their best friend relationship. They still did everything together, from going to football matches, to working out together, to even working together. But there was something else they had in common. Both brothers and their dad were really into guns. They had their own collection, and they often went to shooting ranges together. And Cody and Grant had their own airsoft league. You know how something creepy always happens in a home full of guns? Yeah, it's about to get pretty nasty. Grant had always been the awkward one in the family. He was the shyest one, the most secretive, and didn't really have any friends, except Cody. Well, Cody and his friends. But no one would invite Grant out, apart from his brother. So he never seemed interested in leaving the family home and starting out on his own. He wasn't really a social animal, and he didn't seem to have any girlfriends either. So the years passed, and he was still at home with his parents. That's where Cody was too, so why would he leave? He had all the financial comfort and the love of his brother right there. However, that was about to slowly take a turn for the worse. In 2011, Grant got his nursing degree from the University of Central Florida. Cody had gotten it the year before. It was pretty smooth sailing for the brothers, Both their parents worked in the medical care system, and they had their financial support until they began earning good salaries too. But Grant didn't seem happy with his job, or at least he was playing at something else. In June 2018, 29-year-old Grant was arrested and accused of grand theft in the 3rd degree. His boss at work had caught him stealing 8 vials of propofol. That's a really strong sedative for surgery patients, by the way. Grant had these vials in his pocket after work. If that's not theft, what is? However, in December of that year, the charges were dropped as there was no evidence. Grant stated that he'd only stolen the vials for patients who he felt weren't adequately sedated by the doctors. He strongly denied taking them for personal use. That same month, Grant, Cody, and a friend of Cody's named Jericho went on a 2-week trip to Japan. Strangely, this was the end of Grant's relationship with his parents. When he got back from the trip, Chad was no longer friendly to him. He was more controlling and more aggressive, even stating that he wanted his son out of the house. Every single day, Chad would get back from work and immediately ask his son to have a sit down and talk. And every day it would get heated, with Chad raising his voice and urging Grant to leave and make his own money. But the more his father spoke to him, the more Grant seemed to fall into a deep depression. He was now without a job, fired from the last hospital, and he was spending all his time on his computer, playing video games and watching YouTube videos. Whenever he would need money, he would ask his parents, and if his parents refused, Grant would ask Cody. Even though he was just 1 year older than Grant, Cody always behaved like the big brother. He never said no to Grant, no matter how often he asked for money. But it wasn't very healthy for anyone, really. Grant had some nasty addictions, illegal substances, and included. And when I say I'm not talking about girlfriends. Grant spent a lot of time online on a website called myfreecam.com. This was an X-rated website where he could pay for one-on-one time with a cam girl. This is how Grant fell in love with Sylvie. She was a cam girl from Bulgaria, and they never met face to face. In fact, Sylvie was a persona. Perhaps this wasn't even her real name. Cam girls rarely reveal too many real details about their lives on such websites. But Grant was completely infatuated with her, and this wasn't the kind of nice love at first sight. It was an obsession.
All right, Sylvia, look at me. I am outside going to check the mail, and I'm asking you if you can please, pretty please, send me one of your videos. I love it so much when you just send them to me. Yeah, I don't like buying your stuff. It makes me feel weird. Could you please send me one though?
He watched all her videos over and over again. Then he started paying to see her live. Needless to say, Sylvie didn't refuse. She made him feel special, and of course, she enjoyed the cash flow. But Grant genuinely believed he was in an intimate relationship with Sylvie. He didn't see himself as the buyer of her services, but he was. He would spend around $2,500 a day just to watch Sylvie online. That's right, this is how much it costs to buy tokens for such websites. However, he wasn't honest with Sylvie. He told her he lived in his own apartment and that he was a very successful professional gamer. As rich as they come. So when Sylvie got $10,000, then $100,000, she thought nothing of it. Grant would end up paying her $200,000, and almost all of it was his parents' and his brother's money. Grant spent this money on tokens to watch Sylvie, on tips for her, and on sex toys and lingerie, which he would send over to her address for her to put on during their video calls. This was no longer an obsession. It was an addiction. By late 2018, Grant was hacking his parents' credit cards to be able to afford this addiction. And during Grant and Cody's December trip to Japan, Grant stole the credit card of Cody's friend, Jericho. He stayed behind at the hotel while Cody and Jericho went out, and with Jericho's money, he purchased a few hours online with Sylvie. In December 2018, just around the time Grant's case was dropped, Margaret and Chad confronted him about regular $600 charges on their bank accounts. That's when Grant said he was working hard to promote his Twitch account so that he would amass followers and make money of his own. Just what his parents wanted to hear, right? But they kept a close eye on their accounts, and soon enough, they figured out Grant was lying. This was the beginning of the end for the Amato family. On December 19th, Cody and Grant had just gotten back from Japan when there was another heated discussion. Grant's parents now forbade him to ever use their credit cards again, but Grant wouldn't accept this. Cody tried to mediate the fight, but it escalated beyond his control. It ended with a slammed door and Grant leaving with his car at top speed. Margaret was pretty worried. She feared for her son's mental health more than anything, so she dialed 911. She told the dispatcher all about their fight and added that Grant might be the kind to take his own life. A text she'd received from him made her confirm her fears. He'd written, "I'm really tired of everything, just going to handle it my own way." However, he wasn't going to, not really. He drove over to his aunt's house and crashed at hers. His aunt remembers thinking he looked really lost and depressed. She invited him to spend as many days as he needed at her and her husband's place. But she hid all the guns they had for fear he might do something bad. A few days later, Grant's aunt checked her bank account, and surprise, surprise, several charges of hundreds of dollars each were made to an unknown company. But she tracked these down and watched Grant with an eagle eye. He'd spend her money on the same website, talking to Sylvie for hours each night while the family was asleep. Within a week, Grant hacked into the bank accounts of his uncle, aunt, and grandma, all for Sylvie. When Grant's aunt called Chad, he broke down crying. He confessed to having $150,000 worth of debt because of his son. He didn't know what to do anymore. Grant was addicted, and he refused help. Chad pleaded with his sister not to press charges, as he was sure Grant would end up in prison if she did. He promised he would return her the money Grant had stolen, all in a few years' time. By now, Grant had stolen $250,000, all of it for Sylvie and her webcam website. His family knew they had to do something immediately. So around Christmas 2018, Grant's entire family showed up on his aunt's doorstep. Chad gave him an ultimatum. Grant would check himself into a rehab clinic, or he would be cut off from the family for good.
My father chose to admit me to like a depression or an addiction clinic or something like that in Fort Lauderdale called Cornerstone.
Grant was thus admitted into the facility for a 60-day program to treat addiction. This wasn't free either. Chad paid $15,000 for the treatment. While Grant was at the clinic, his worried family started digging through his search history. That's when they discovered the full reality of his addictions. Not only was all of his money going to Sylvie, but he'd been feeding her lies for months and months. So Cody and Chad decided to tell Sylvie the truth. In fact, they messaged the whole community centered around Sylvie on that website. This was when Sylvie found out that Grant was a 29-year-old unemployed man living with his parents and stealing their money to give it to her. Chad also wrote to Sylvie urging her to cut off all communication with Grant. As soon as Grant would come home, he would not be allowed to be in contact with her anymore. It's not like Sylvie would ever give the money back to the family, but they could at least prevent more stealing. Sadly, Grant came home after 2 weeks. He hadn't even completed half of his program, yet he insisted that he was cured. This was on January 5th, shortly after New Year's. So the Amatos sat Grant down and gave him a few rules for 2019. He would be allowed to live with them if he got a job, stopped stealing, and stopped interacting with Sylvie. His computer would also be taken out of his room every night to ensure that he wouldn't sneak on the website while everyone was sleeping. He even had a clear set of rules written down. This doesn't really sound like a healthy lifestyle for a man who's about to turn 30, but somehow Grant was still not motivated to leave the family home. He seemed to agree to the rules and said he would find a job soon. But then he heard his parents had spoken to Sylvie and told her the truth. That day, something switched in Grant's mind. He couldn't hear his parents' arguments anymore, that he was prioritizing a stranger over his family, that they were in debt because of his addiction, or that it was simply unhealthy to feed such an addiction. Now, he was beyond angry. But he didn't show it for a while. He would just ask his mother for her phone every now and then because now he didn't have a smartphone. His parents went to great lengths to keep him away from Sylvie. Margaret would sometimes give her his phone for an hour or two just so he could message Sylvie on Twitter. But Chad did not agree with this. On Thursday, January 24th, he found out, and he told Grant to pack his bags and leave the house. A huge fight ensued once more. At 9:15 p.m., Cody's shift at the hospital ended, and he'd received just about a dozen text messages about the drama that was happening at home. He then texted his girlfriend. He was supposed to go to hers overnight. Instead, he went home to deal with stupid shit. Cody's life could have been spared, but he wanted to protect his little brother. On the morning of January 25th, Cody's work colleagues were wondering where he could be. He was always at work half an hour before everyone else. Now, he was AWOL.
Everybody's response was, I can't believe he's not here. This is so out of the ordinary. Why would he not show up?
After a few minutes of deliberation, Cody's colleagues decided to call the police and ask for a wellness check. Something was wrong.
Knocked on every window, every door, hit the air horn.
The detective on the scene asked his supervisor whether he could enter the house.
I was just trying to get information to see, because I didn't want FD coming in if we have a legit homicide. If it's then
yeah, I just wanted to be 100% sure, especially the mom.
With that, but that's what it was leaning towards. I didn't want them coming in.
Yeah.
That's why I needed a call.
There were no signs of a break-in, but the house was awfully quiet. He was granted permission to enter as long as he didn't damage the doors or windows. 2 officers thus entered the home by using a knife to move a deadbolt on the back door.
Sheriff's office!
At the bottom of the stairs, Cody Amato's body was lying in a fetal position in a pool of blood. The officer shouted to the dispatch, Signal 32. This meant he believed that Cody had shot himself in the stomach. A few minutes later, he shouted Signal 7. He'd found Chad's body lying on his back on the kitchen floor. Finally, the officers found Margaret in her study chair. She almost looked as if she'd fallen asleep on her desk, but it was a really awkward position. When the officers had a closer look, they realized she'd been shot in the face. The police considered the theory of a murder-suicide situation. Perhaps Cody killed his parents. Then he took his own life. But where was Grant? He lived there too, as far as the record showed. He was a suspect too, and the police had to talk to him. On January 27th, 2 days after the murders, the officers found Grant at an Orange County hotel. When he was taken to the police station for an interrogation, Grant seemed calm and cooperative. He told them all about his overbearing father and strange fights with them.
One of his rules was that I wasn't allowed to talk to the woman anymore.
He also told them about Sylvie and how he wasn't allowed to speak to her after the treatment. He confirmed that on Thursday night, Chad had followed his son while talking to Sylvie, so he got angry.
So he had apparently found out, and then
Unhappy.
Right, and one of the stipulations was that he told me at the dinner was, if you speak to this woman again, you're out of the house.
Grant added that Chad threatened to kill him if he ever came back to their property.
You can pack up your shit, and then you're off my property. If I ever step back onto his property, that he would kill me.
A pretty grim picture, right? Was Grant trying to frame his father for the familicide? In any case, it was pretty easy to see through him. The police officers decided to put more pressure on him and keep asking him about the events of January 25th. First, he said he'd packed his bags and put them in his car on the evening of January 24th. Then he slept in his car. The next morning he left, not knowing what had happened inside the house. But after being asked for more specifics about the night, he admitted he had actually left home later, in the early hours of January 25th. This was an opportunity for the detectives to confront him with the actual question.
Did you leave the house with your brother Cody looking like that? Or did you leave the house with your father looking like that? Or your mother? Is that how you left your family?
No. Nobody else went into that house.
Who left your family like this? If you were the one that's been depressed, you were the one that owes money, you were the one that got into a confrontation with your father, who did this to your family?
The detective put Grant in a tough spot. He couldn't really pin the blame on anyone else. Not anymore. He was visibly in great distress. However, he didn't answer anything and he was allowed to leave the station. But the police ensured he would return to the hotel, where he would be under close supervision. On January 28th, he was officially arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. Grant's trial began in July 2019. The prosecution presented pictures from inside Grant's bedroom, his expensive computers and gaming equipment in particular. They pointed out to the fact that nothing was stolen from the Amato home, nor were there any signs of forced entry. Whoever killed the family did it from within. The theory goes as follows. Grant shot his mother while she was in her study, alone, home, with her son. Then, when Chad arrived from work, Grant surprised him and shot him in the back. The last to arrive home was Cody, and he was shot as soon as he entered the house. He might not have even known his parents were dead at this point. Then, Grant tried to stage a murder-suicide. During this time, Grant transferred all the data on his computers to a flash drive. During the trial, it was also revealed that Grant had written an 8-page statement dedicated to the 6 men on the Sylvie forum. He told the truth about himself and expressed how much he hated his controlling father. Then came Grant's defense team, who pointed out that it's not enough to convict Grant just by the exclusion of other suspects.
Fact number 1, a complete lack of physical evidence linking Mr. Amato to the deaths of his parents and brother. Fact number 2, Mr. Amato had no firearm with which to commit these murders because he had sold all of his guns and had no access to any other guns that may have been in the residence. And fact number 3, police, when they entered the home of the Amato family, found a nefarious combination of drugs, guns, and ammunition.
And on top of it, Grant's DNA was not found on any of the guns or casings. But several people came to testify against Grant. One important stand was that of Cody's friend and work colleague, Chris. He said that on the evening of January 24th, Cody left work 15 minutes early, which meant his double shift would only be paid as a normal one. This was highly unusual for Cody.
I'd never seen Cody leave early and leaving money on the table like that.
An officer also testified to Grant moving the bodies of his parents so as to stage a murder-suicide. Then came Jason Amato, the boy's older half-brother. He talked about the strained relationships between Grant and his parents and about the contract Chad had made at the beginning of 2019, that strict set rules for Grant.
I would call it like an ultimatum. Some options that were given to Grant to choose between after leaving the facility. It states that it informed Grant that they had reached out to this woman to let them know, or to let her know some of the things that Grant had been saying weren't 100% true, and that he wasn't allowed to communicate with her anymore based off of those lies.
Jason talked to the authorities through the December 2018 timeline, the Japan trip, the runoff to Grant's aunt's house, the money stealing, and the rehab clinic. The officer who arrested Grant at the hotel found a note written by Grant on January 25th.
I miss being at home already, and it's only been 1 day since I was kicked out by Dad. Cody said he'd take care of it, but there is nothing he could do about this. I miss the house and comfort, but the atmosphere had been getting worse and worse.
It was clear the relationship between Grant and Cody had to be further analyzed. So a digital forensic analyst took to the stand and examined Grant's actions on January 24th. Just before midnight, he tried to connect Cody's phone to his computer and wipe the contents. At 6 p.m. the next day, just after killing his father, Grant went into Chad's phone and read multiple notes. On Chad's phone, Grant typed on Safari, how to wipe an iPhone without a password. He then sent fake texts between Chad and Cody's phones, and then he deleted the Blink app, which was connected to the security cameras in the house. And here's the last drop. At 2 a.m. the next day, Grant used his dead father's fingerprint to access his banking app and transfer $600 to myfreecams.com. He reactivated his account. This was a pretty big piece of damning evidence, right? Still, Grant's defense attorney played on the fact that the analyst wasn't at the family home to know if Grant was doing all the shady business on the phones.
You weren't there when those people entered into whatever they did on those devices, correct?
Correct.
So you're taking devices with unknown people and speculating based on that what somebody did with a phone when you weren't there to plug it into a tower, correct?
Correct.
But there were internet searches about resetting passwords on Grant's computer days before the murders. Finally, Cody's friend Jericho took the stand. Remember him? He was the guy whose credit card Grant stole in Japan.
I was out to dinner, and I went to pay for the dinner with the Discover card, and it had been frozen. So I contacted my father, since it's like a family account, and he sent me a screenshot of like three charges on the Discover. One went through, and then the other two were denied, but they were for my free cam tokens.
Guess what? The charges were all made on the day Grant stayed behind at the hotel and let Cody and Jericho go out. Another friend of Cody's testified to one of his guns being stolen from his home shortly after a visit from Cody and Grant. He had a hunch this might be the same gun used in the murders. After all, Grant had a penchant for stealing. Soon enough, the casings were linked to this kind of gun. The prosecution's closing statement revealed Grant's mistakes.
Grant Amato knew about blood, he knew about DNA, he knew how to shoot. But after you murder your family, you make mistakes. And I pointed out the mistakes he's made, including the firearm being on Chad backwards, including the digital evidence that we were able to locate, including the bank records, including all the cellular data, including the Wi-Fi records, deleted records, deleted applications.
After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Grant guilty of all 3 murders. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Based upon this case, 2019 CF 337 CFA, the state of Florida versus Grant Amato, you've been found guilty of 3 counts for killing both your mother, your father, and your brother, Margaret Amato, Chad Amato, and Cody Amato. At this point, you've been found guilty by a jury of your peers who have now indicated that you are not to be sentenced to the death penalty. Based upon those circumstances, the court is limited to 1 finding and 1 sentence for you. As to each count, the court would adjudicate you guilty. I would sentence you to life imprisonment without any possibility of parole as to each count.
If he showed some tears and remorse when the police first showed him the pictures of his dead family, now he just took the news poker-faced. Is he in denial? Or has he accepted that he won't ever be free or talk to Sylvie again? No matter his feelings, we should never forget the scars he left behind and the trauma the rest of his family now has to live with. Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time, and keep yourself safe.